The sound of metal slamming against metal echoed through the empty B-wing hallway like a gunshot. Maya Chen's slight frame disappeared into the narrow confines of locker number 247, her desperate fingers clawing at the closing door as 3 pairs of hands forced it shut. Tyler Morrison's triumphant laughter bounced off the institutional walls while Jake Sullivan and Connor Davis high-fived behind him, their breath visible in the frigid Colorado air that seeped through the building's old windows. The digital lock clicked into place with mechanical finality, trapping the 16-year-old newcomer in a space barely wide enough for textbooks, let alone a human being. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya's world had become a vertical coffin of cold steel and darkness. The metallic smell of rust and industrial cleaning supplies filled her nostrils as she pressed her palms against the unforgiving walls that seemed to compress around her with each panicked breath. Through the thin ventilation slits, she could hear Tyler's voice dripping with satisfaction as he addressed his accomplices. "Welcome to Westfield High, California girl," he sneered, his words carrying the casual cruelty that had become his trademark over the past 3 years of terrorizing anyone who dared to challenge his social dominance. The irony wasn't lost on Tyler that he'd chosen this particular method of humiliation. Locker stuffing was such a cliché, something straight out of an 80s movie, but there was something deliciously symbolic about literally putting the new student in her place. Maya Chen had arrived at Westfield just 2 weeks ago with her designer backpack and West Coast confidence, acting as if she belonged anywhere she chose to plant herself. Her very presence seemed to mock the carefully constructed social hierarchy that Tyler had spent years building through strategic intimidation and family influence. Jake Sullivan adjusted his wrestling team jacket and glanced nervously at the security camera mounted at the far end of the hallway. "Dude, what if someone sees the footage?" he whispered, though his concern was more about getting caught than about the morality of their actions. Tyler followed his gaze and smirked with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences for anything in his 17 years of existence. "That camera's been broken since September, and you know Principal Anderson isn't exactly eager to investigate anything that might reflect poorly on his precious athletes." Connor Davis, the tallest of the 3 at 6 feet 4 inches, bounced a basketball against his hip while keeping watch for any approaching faculty members. His role in their little gang was primarily as muscle and lookout, though he sometimes surprised himself with creative suggestions for new ways to assert their dominance over the student body. Today's locker incident had actually been his idea, inspired by a scene from some forgotten comedy film he'd watched over the weekend. "How long do we leave her in there?" he asked, already imagining the social media posts that would emerge from this prank. Inside her metallic prison, Maya fought against the rising panic that threatened to overwhelm her rational thinking. The space was so narrow that she couldn't fully extend her arms, and the darkness was complete except for thin streams of fluorescent light that managed to penetrate the ventilation grating. She could hear the muffled voices of her tormentors discussing their next moves, their casual tone making it clear that this was just another Tuesday afternoon for them. Another opportunity to demonstrate their power over someone they perceived as vulnerable. What Tyler Morrison and his crew couldn't have known was that Maya Chen had spent the last 4 years of her life in environments far more challenging than a high school hallway in suburban Colorado. While they'd been perfecting their intimidation techniques on honor students and theater kids, she'd been learning to overcome opponents who were bigger, stronger, and more experienced than anyone at Westfield High could imagine. The breathing techniques that were keeping her calm in this confined space hadn't been learned in meditation class or therapy sessions. They'd been drilled into her during thousands of hours of training at Rocky Mountain MMA Academy back in San Diego, where controlling your response to pressure could mean the difference between victory and defeat. Tyler pressed his ear against the locker door, listening for sounds of distress, that would confirm their prank was having the desired psychological impact. "I think she's crying in there," he announced with obvious satisfaction, though Maya's controlled breathing was actually the sound of someone preparing for action rather than succumbing to fear. Maybe next time she'll think twice before acting like she's better than everyone else, just because she's from California. The three boys had no way of knowing that their victim was currently calculating the structural weaknesses of her temporary prison, identifying pressure points and leverage opportunities with the same methodical precision she'd once applied to analyzing opponents in championship matches. Maya's fingers traced the internal mechanisms of the lock, feeling for the release points that her knowledge of physics and mechanical systems could exploit. Her mother's recent move to Colorado for a position at Denver General Hospital had forced Maya to leave behind everything familiar, but it hadn't erased the skills and confidence that years of elite competition had burned into her muscle memory. As Tyler, Jake, and Connor began walking away from the scene of their latest triumph, congratulating themselves on another successful assertion of dominance, none of them noticed the subtle clicking sounds coming from inside locker 247. Maya. Chen was about to teach Westfield High School a lesson that wouldn't be found in any textbook, and the education was going to begin much sooner than anyone expected. Maya Chen had never intended to be invisible, but invisibility seemed to be her default setting at Westfield High School. At 5 feet 3 inches and barely 110 pounds, she moved through the crowded hallways like a shadow, her straight black hair falling across her face in a way that discouraged eye contact and conversation. The oversized hoodies and jeans she favored made her appear even smaller than she actually was, creating the impression of a girl who was trying to disappear into her clothing rather than make any kind of statement about who she might be. The transition from San Diego to Brookshire had been brutal in ways that Maya hadn't anticipated. Back in California, she'd been part of a diverse student body where her mixed heritage and quiet demeanor hadn't marked her as particularly unusual or noteworthy. Here in Colorado, surrounded by kids who'd known each other since elementary school, her every gesture seemed to broadcast her outsider status. The way she pronounced certain words, her preference for Mexican food over pizza, even her tendency to wear lighter jackets in weather that had her new classmates bundled up like Arctic explorers, everything about her seemed to announce that she didn't belong. Her mother, Dr. Sarah Chen, had tried to prepare her for the adjustment challenges that came with relocating during junior year of high school. Sarah worked brutal 12-hour shifts in the emergency room at Denver General, often leaving before Maya woke up and returning long after she'd gone to bed. The divorce had been finalized just 3 months before their move, and both mother and daughter were still processing the emotional fallout of watching their family unit dissolve. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maya understood that her mother needed this fresh start, needed the career opportunity and geographical distance from the painful memories that seemed to lurk in every familiar place back home. What made the transition even more difficult was Maya's decision to completely reinvent herself for this new chapter of her life. The confident, focused athlete who dominated junior circuits in Southern California had been deliberately buried beneath layers of deliberate mediocrity and studied ordinariness. She'd made a conscious choice to become unremarkable, to blend into the background and avoid the kind of attention that had defined her previous existence. This new version of herself attended classes without speaking unless directly questioned, ate lunch alone while reading paperback novels, and spent her afternoons working part-time at a local bookstore rather than participating in any extracurricular activities. The other students at Westfield seemed to view her as exactly what she was pretending to be, a shy transplant from California who was struggling to adapt to their social ecosystem. Teachers addressed her with the patient tone reserved for students who needed extra encouragement to participate in class discussions. Her English teacher, Ms. Parker, had actually pulled her aside after class to suggest that she might benefit from joining the drama club or student newspaper as a way to make friends and develop confidence. The concern was genuine and well-intentioned, but it stung Maya to realize how successfully she'd convinced everyone that she was fragile and in need of protection. Maya's carefully constructed image of vulnerability wasn't entirely false, though. The loneliness was real, as was her struggle to navigate the complex social dynamics of a school, where everyone else seemed to have established relationships and defined roles. She missed her friends back in San Diego, missed the warm weather and familiar neighborhoods, missed the version of herself that had felt comfortable and capable in her own skin. The girl who sat alone in the Westfield cafeteria picking at her lunch was genuinely struggling, even if the reasons for her struggles were more complicated than her classmates could have imagined. Her living situation only reinforced the impression that she was a child in need of sympathy and support. The small apartment she shared with her mother was sparsely furnished with items hastily purchased from discount stores and second-hand shops. Maya had left most of her possessions behind in California, keeping only the essentials and a few sentimental items that reminded her of happier times. Her bedroom was practically monastic in its simplicity: a twin bed with plain white sheets, a small desk for homework, and a single bookshelf lined with fantasy novels and academic textbooks. The financial stress of the divorce and relocation had forced both Maya and her mother to adopt a more modest lifestyle than they'd enjoyed in California. Maya's part-time job at Brookshire Books wasn't just a way to stay busy after school. It was a necessity that helped cover her basic expenses and contributed to their household budget. She rode the city bus to work rather than driving her own car, carried her lunch in a brown paper bag instead of buying food from the school cafeteria, and wore the same rotation of clothing day after day because building a new wardrobe wasn't a financial priority. Her co-workers at the bookstore, mostly college students and retirees, treated her with the same protective kindness that she encountered at school. They assumed she was a quiet, studious girl who preferred books to people and needed gentle encouragement to come out of her shell. Maya had become so skilled at projecting helplessness that even adults who interacted with her regularly felt compelled to offer guidance and support for navigating life's basic challenges. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on Maya, though. She kept those observations to herself. Students like Tyler Morrison looked at her and saw an easy target, someone who could be intimidated without risk of meaningful retaliation. Teachers like Miss Parker saw a struggling teenager who needed mentorship and encouragement to develop self-confidence. Her mother saw a daughter who was courageously adapting to difficult circumstances while maintaining her academic performance and helping with family responsibilities. All of these perceptions contained elements of truth, but none of them captured the complete picture of who Maya Chen actually was beneath the carefully constructed facade. She had indeed become genuinely shy and uncertain in this new environment, genuinely struggling with loneliness and identity questions that came with major life transitions. But the foundation of strength and capability that had been built over years of dedicated training and competition hadn't disappeared simply because she'd chosen to stop displaying it publicly. Maya's daily routine at Westfield had become a careful performance designed to maintain her unremarkable status while she figured out how to rebuild her life in this unfamiliar place. She arrived at school early to avoid the crowds gathered around lockers and in common areas. She chose seats in the back of classrooms where she could observe without being observed. She timed her movements between classes to minimize interactions with other students, especially the groups of athletes who seemed to own the hallways during transition periods. The performance had been largely successful for the first 2 weeks of her enrollment at Westfield. She'd managed to remain invisible to most of her classmates while gradually learning the social geography of her new environment. She'd identified the various cliques and hierarchies, figured out which teachers were approachable and which ones maintained strict professional distance, and developed strategies for navigating the physical spaces of the building without attracting unwanted attention. Maya had genuinely believed that she could continue flying under the radar indefinitely, that her strategy of deliberate invisibility would protect her from the kind of conflicts that seemed to plague other students who didn't fit neatly into established social categories. She'd watched Tyler Morrison and his crew target other students over the past 2 weeks, noting their preference for victims who either fought back ineffectively or submitted completely to their dominance games. What Maya hadn't fully understood was that in a social ecosystem like Westfield High School, even attempts to remain neutral and unnoticed could be interpreted as challenges to the established order. Her very presence as an outsider, combined with her obvious efforts to avoid engaging with the social hierarchy, had eventually attracted exactly the kind of attention she'd been trying to avoid. Brookshire Books occupied the corner unit of a modest strip mall that had seen better decades. Wedged between a nail salon and a shop that sold vitamins and supplements to the health-conscious residents of suburban Colorado, the bookstore's weathered exterior and hand-painted sign gave it the appearance of a business hanging on through determination rather than profit. But inside, the warm lighting and carefully organized shelves created a sanctuary that had become Maya's refuge during her most difficult weeks in this new town. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, the 72-year-old owner, had hired Maya without checking references or conducting a formal interview. She'd simply looked at the nervous teenager who'd walked through her door asking about the help wanted sign and decided that anyone who spent their first 5 minutes in the store gravitating toward the poetry section probably possessed the kind of soul that would treat books with appropriate reverence. Eleanor had built her business over 3 decades on instinct rather than conventional retail wisdom, and her instincts about Maya had proven remarkably accurate. The bookstore operated more like a community center than a traditional business, attracting an eclectic mixture of regular customers who treated the aisles as gathering spaces for informal discussions about literature, politics, and the various dramas of small-town life. Maya had initially found the constant conversation intimidating, preferring the solitude of organizing inventory and processing new arrivals in the back room. But gradually, she'd been drawn into the gentle rhythms of a place where ideas mattered more than social status and where her opinions about books were valued regardless of her age or newcomer status. Her favorite customers included Mr. James Wilson, a retired high school English teacher who spent Tuesday afternoons browsing the classic literature section and engaging anyone willing to listen in passionate discussions about the enduring relevance of 19th-century novels. There was also Carmen Rodriguez, a graduate student at the University of Colorado, who drove 40 minutes each way to access Eleanor's carefully curated selection of feminist literature and social theory texts that weren't available in larger chain stores. Maya had discovered that working at Brookshire Books provided her with something she'd been missing since leaving California, a sense of purpose that extended beyond her own survival and adaptation. She'd developed genuine expertise in matching customers with books that suited their interests and reading levels, and she'd begun contributing to the store's social media presence by writing brief reviews of new arrivals. Eleanor had even started ordering titles based on Maya's recommendations, trusting her judgment about what might appeal to their customer base. The financial contribution of her part-time job was crucial to her family's stability, but the emotional benefits were equally important. At the bookstore, Maya could be helpful and knowledgeable without having to perform the careful invisibility that had become her survival strategy at school. Customers sought out her recommendations and thanked her for introducing them to authors they'd never considered. The validation was subtle but consistent, reminding her that she possessed skills and insights that had value in the adult world, even if they meant nothing in the complex social ecosystem of Westfield High School. Her relationship with her mother had become more complicated since their move to Colorado, strained by the pressures of financial uncertainty and the Emotional aftermath of divorce proceedings that had dragged on for months before reaching resolution. Dr. Sarah Chen worked exhausting shifts at Denver General Hospital, often covering for colleagues and accepting overtime assignments that left her depleted. When she finally returned to their small apartment, the strong, confident woman who had once seemed capable of handling any crisis now appeared fragile and overwhelmed by circumstances that seemed to multiply faster than solutions could be found. Maya had gradually assumed responsibilities that would have been unthinkable during their comfortable life in California. She managed most of the household tasks, from grocery shopping to bill paying, while maintaining her academic performance and contributing financially through her bookstore. Wages. The role reversal felt strange and sometimes overwhelming, but it also provided her with a sense of agency during a period when most aspects of her life felt completely beyond her control. Their evening conversations, when they managed to be home at the same time, had taken on the careful quality of diplomatic negotiations. Both mother and daughter were aware of the stress the other was experiencing, and both were trying to avoid adding additional burdens to an already difficult situation. Maya had stopped mentioning the social challenges she was facing at school, not wanting to give her mother another problem to worry about. Sarah had stopped discussing the financial pressures and workplace conflicts that dominated her days, trying to preserve some sense of normalcy for her daughter during this transition period. Despite the challenges, Maya had begun to believe that she could build something meaningful in Colorado if she could just navigate the remaining months of high school without major complications. Her grades were excellent, positioning her well for college applications that could provide pathways to scholarships and academic opportunities. Her work experience at the bookstore had given her practical skills and professional references that would strengthen her resume. Most importantly, she'd started to develop a sense of independence and capability that felt more mature and resilient than the confidence she'd possessed back in California. The small apartment she shared with her mother had gradually become more comfortable as they'd accumulated furniture and personal items that made the space feel less temporary. Maya had painted her bedroom walls a warm blue color and arranged her books and artwork in ways that created a sense of personal sanctuary. She'd established routines and habits that provided structure during uncertain times, including morning jogs through their neighborhood and weekend visits to the Denver Art Museum that reminded her of the cultural richness that was still accessible in her new environment. Her academic goals had become more focused and ambitious during her time at Westfield, partly as a response to the social isolation she was experiencing. If she couldn't find her place among her high school peers, she would use this time to prepare for college environments where intellectual curiosity and academic achievement were more valued than athletic ability or family wealth. She'd been researching universities with strong liberal arts programs and had begun corresponding with admissions counselors about scholarship opportunities for students from single-parent households. Maya had also started volunteering at the Brookshire Public Library on weekend mornings, helping with children's reading programs and assisting elderly patrons with computer literacy classes. The volunteer work connected her to community members outside the high school social ecosystem and reinforced her growing sense that she could find purpose and belonging through service rather than popularity. The librarians had begun discussing the possibility of her taking on additional responsibilities during the summer, potentially leading reading groups and helping with special events. All of these carefully constructed elements of her new life in Colorado represented investments in a future that felt increasingly possible and hopeful. Maya had learned to find satisfaction in small victories and gradual progress rather than the dramatic successes that had characterized her previous life in California. She was building something sustainable and meaningful, something that could provide foundation for the adult life she was beginning to envision for herself. The prospect of completing her final year and a half at Westfield without major social Complications had seemed entirely realistic until her encounter with Tyler Morrison and his crew in the B-wing hallway. She genuinely believed that her strategy of maintaining invisibility and avoiding conflicts would allow her to protect everything she'd been working to build during these difficult months of transition and adaptation. The photos hidden in Maya's desk drawer told a story that no one at Westfield High School could have imagined. Stacked beneath her geometry textbook and college application materials were dozens of images from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. Maya Chen in fighting stance, her gloved hands raised in perfect defensive position. Maya celebrating victory after victory, championship belts draped across her shoulders, surrounded by trainers and teammates whose faces radiated pride and accomplishment. Maya executing techniques with precision that had taken years to develop, her body moving with the fluid grace of someone who had transformed physical combat into artistic expression. Rocky Mountain Combat Academy in San Diego had been Maya's second home for nearly 4 years, a converted warehouse in an industrial district where the sound of heavy bags being pummeled and the rhythmic slapping of jump ropes provided a constant percussion backdrop to serious athletic training. The gym attracted fighters from across Southern California, from amateur hopefuls to seasoned professionals preparing for major competitions. Maya had earned her place among them not through family connections or financial advantages, but through relentless dedication and natural ability that had impressed even the most skeptical coaches. Her journey into mixed martial arts had begun almost accidentally during her freshman year of high school, when her mother had enrolled her in a women's self-defense course at their local community center. Dr. Sarah Chen had been working late shifts at the hospital and worried about her daughter's safety during after-school activities and weekend outings with friends. The self-defense classes were meant to provide Maya with basic skills and confidence, nothing more ambitious than the ability to escape from dangerous situations should they arise. What neither mother nor daughter had anticipated was Maya's immediate and intense connection to the physical and mental challenges of martial arts training. Within weeks of starting the beginner classes, she was staying after sessions to practice techniques and asking instructor Lisa Morales about more advanced training opportunities. Lisa, a former professional fighter who had transitioned into coaching after a career-ending injury, recognized something special in Maya's combination of natural athleticism, fearless attitude, and obsessive attention to technical details. Under Lisa's guidance, Maya had progressed from basic self-defense to serious competitive training with remarkable speed. Her small stature, which had made her seem vulnerable in high school social situations, became a significant advantage in the ring, where her low center of gravity and quick movements allowed her to outmaneuver larger opponents. She developed a fighting style that emphasized speed, precision, and strategic thinking over brute force, becoming known for her ability to anticipate and counter her opponent's attacks before they could fully develop. The transition from recreational training to serious competition had happened gradually, almost without Maya realizing how completely the sport had come to dominate her life. She was spending 4 hours every weekday afternoon at Rocky Mountain Combat Academy, working with different coaches on striking techniques, grappling, conditioning, and mental preparation. Her weekends were devoted to tournaments and training camps that took her across California and eventually to competitions in Nevada, Arizona, and Texas. Maya's record in the junior divisions had been nothing short of extraordinary. 27 wins against only 3 losses, with most of her victories coming by way of submission or technical knockout rather than judges' decisions. She preferred to end fights definitively, using her superior technique to force opponents into positions where continuing would have been dangerous to their health. Her signature move, a lightning-fast transition from defensive posture to rear naked choke, had become so reliable that other fighters in her weight class spent significant training time specifically preparing to defend against it. The trophies and medals accumulating in her bedroom had represented more than athletic achievement. They were symbols of a version of herself that felt completely authentic and powerful, a persona that commanded respect from peers and adults alike. At Rocky Mountain Combat Academy, Maya Chen wasn't the quiet bookworm who struggled with social interactions. She was a force to be reckoned with, someone whose skills and determination had earned recognition from coaches who had worked with Olympic-level athletes and professional fighters. Her training regimen had been exhausting and all-consuming, but also deeply satisfying in ways that traditional high school activities had never approached. The physical conditioning required for competitive mixed martial arts had pushed her body to limits she hadn't known existed, developing strength, endurance, and flexibility that made her feel capable of handling whatever challenges life might present. The mental discipline required for high-level competition had taught her to remain calm under pressure, to think strategically when adrenaline was flooding her system, and to maintain focus despite pain, fatigue, or fear. The coaching staff at Rocky Mountain Combat Academy had become like a second family to Maya, providing mentorship and support that extended far beyond athletic training. Head coach Marcus Rivera, a former professional heavyweight who had competed internationally before establishing the gym, had taken special interest in Maya's development both as a fighter and as a young woman navigating the complexities of adolescence. His wife Elena, who managed the gym's business operations and provided counseling services for fighters dealing with performance anxiety or personal issues, had become something like an aunt to Maya during the years when her parents' marriage was deteriorating. Maya's success in junior competitions had attracted attention from several colleges with strong martial arts programs, as well as from professional organizations that were always scouting for promising young talent. She'd received scholarship offers from universities across the country and had been approached by managers interested in representing her if she decided to pursue professional fighting after turning 18. The trajectory of her life had seemed clear and exciting, with multiple pathways available that would allow her to continue developing her skills while pursuing higher education or professional competition. The decision to walk away from competitive fighting had been one of the most difficult choices Maya had ever faced, but it had felt necessary given the chaos that was consuming her family life during her parents' divorce proceedings. Dr. Sarah Chen had needed support during the legal battles and financial negotiations that would determine their future, and Maya's tournament schedule had been making it impossible for her to provide that support when it mattered most. The offers from colleges and professional organizations would still be available in a few years, she had reasoned, but her mother needed her help immediately. Leaving California had meant leaving behind not just Rocky Mountain Combat Academy and the coaches who had become so important to her development, but also the entire identity she had constructed around her athletic achievements. The confident, skilled fighter who had dominated junior competitions seemed incompatible with the new life she and her mother were trying to build in Colorado. Maya had made a conscious decision to bury that version of herself, to become someone ordinary and unremarkable who could focus entirely on academic achievement and family responsibilities. The physical training that had once defined her daily routine had been replaced by long shifts at the bookstore and extended study sessions, designed to maintain her academic performance despite the emotional stress of major life transitions. The strength and conditioning that had made her formidable in competition were gradually diminishing through months of inactivity, though the technical knowledge and mental preparation that had been drilled into her over years of training remained sharp and accessible. Maya kept her competition gloves in a shoebox at the back of her closet, wrapped in the same protective cloth that had once kept them clean between training sessions. Sometimes late at night, when her mother was working and their apartment was completely quiet, she would take them out and practice shadowboxing in her small bedroom, moving through combinations and defensive sequences that her muscles remembered perfectly despite the months of disuse. The secret she was keeping from everyone at Westfield High School wasn't just about her athletic background or her achievements in martial arts competition. It was about a fundamental aspect of her personality that she had chosen to suppress, in order to protect the new life she and her mother were building together. The girl who had once stepped into rings against opponents who had trained for years to defeat her was still there, beneath the carefully constructed facade of vulnerability and ordinariness, waiting for circumstances that might require her to remember who she had once been. Tyler Morrison commanded attention the moment he entered any room at Westfield High School, not through deliberate effort, but through the natural magnetism that came from 17 years of never doubting his place at the center of whatever universe he happened to occupy. Standing 6 feet 2 inches tall with the broad shoulders and confident posture of someone who had been lifting weights since middle school, Tyler moved through the hallways with the unhurried swagger of absolute territorial ownership. His sandy brown hair was always perfectly styled, his clothes expensive enough to signal wealth without appearing ostentatious, and his smile carried the kind of easy charm that made adults trust him instantly and peers either worship or fear him. The Morrison family name opened doors throughout Brookshire that remained firmly closed to most residents of the suburban Colorado community. Tyler's father, David Morrison, owned Morrison Construction, the largest building company in the region, responsible for most of the new housing developments and commercial projects that had transformed Brookshire from a sleepy mountain town into a thriving suburban center over the past 2 decades. The family's financial success had been accompanied by political influence that extended from city council meetings to state legislative sessions, creating a network of connections that insulated Tyler from the kind of consequences that might have shaped other teenagers' understanding of appropriate behavior. His mother, Patricia Morrison, served on the school board and chaired the athletic booster club, positions that gave her direct influence over administrative decisions and educational policies. Her involvement in school governance wasn't motivated by genuine concern for educational quality or student welfare, but rather by her determination to ensure that Tyler's high school experience unfolded exactly according to her expectations. She attended every football game, every wrestling match, and every social event where her presence might remind faculty and staff that the Morrison family's continued financial support depended on their son receiving appropriate treatment. Tyler's athletic achievements provided additional layers of protection and privilege that reinforced his sense of invulnerability. As the starting linebacker for Westfield's varsity football team, he was considered essential to their championship aspirations and was treated accordingly by coaches, administrators, and community members who measured the school's success primarily through sports victories. His statistics were impressive enough to attract attention from college recruiters, and several Division II programs had already expressed interest in offering him scholarships that would extend his athletic career beyond high school. The combination of family wealth, political connections, and athletic success had created an environment where Tyler's worst impulses were consistently enabled rather than corrected. Teachers who might have challenged his disruptive behavior in class were reminded by administrators about the importance of maintaining positive relationships with influential families. Coaches who witnessed his cruel treatment of younger or weaker teammates chose to interpret his aggression as competitive intensity rather than character defects that needed addressing. Jake Sullivan served as Tyler's closest ally and most reliable accomplice, a partnership that had been forged during their elementary school years and strengthened through shared experiences in youth sports and social activities. Jake's family operated Sullivan's Hardware, a local business that had prospered by maintaining exclusive contracts with Morrison Construction for tools and supplies. The economic relationship between their families had created personal bonds that extended far beyond simple friendship, making Jake feel personally invested in protecting Tyler's reputation and social position. Physically, Jake was shorter than Tyler but stockier, with the build of someone who had been wrestling competitively since middle school and planned to continue the sport in college. His strength and technical skill on the wrestling mat had earned him recognition as one of the best grapplers in their weight class throughout the state, achievements that provided him with his own measure of athletic credibility, independent of his association with Tyler. However, Jake's genuine accomplishments were often overshadowed by his willingness to participate in Tyler's campaigns of intimidation against students who were perceived as threats to their social dominance. Connor Davis completed their trio, bringing a combination of size, athletic ability, and cheerful amorality that made him perfectly suited for his role as muscle and comic relief in their various schemes. At 6 feet 4 inches and over 200 pounds, Connor possessed the kind of imposing physical presence that could intimidate other students without him having to say or do anything particularly threatening. His size had made him a natural choice for the basketball team's center position, and his decent performance on the court had earned him modest recognition from college scouts, who were always looking for tall players with room for development. Connor's personality was more genuinely friendly than either Tyler's calculated charm or Jake's intense loyalty, which made his participation in bullying activities somehow more disturbing than his companions' behavior. He seemed to view their campaigns against vulnerable students as elaborate pranks rather than serious harassment, laughing at the suffering they caused with the innocent enthusiasm of someone who had never experienced genuine fear or powerlessness in his own life. The three young men had perfected their techniques over years of practice, developing sophisticated approaches to intimidation that avoided the kind of obvious violence that might trigger serious administrative intervention. They specialized in psychological pressure, social isolation, and carefully calibrated physical harassment that stopped just short of leaving evidence that could be used against them in formal disciplinary proceedings. Their methods were designed to make their victims feel helpless and alone while maintaining plausible deniability about their own responsibility for the suffering they caused. Tyler's crew had systematically targeted students who fit specific profiles over their years at Westfield. They preferred victims who were isolated from strong social support networks, academically successful in ways that might make other students resentful, or different enough from the school's mainstream culture to seem like legitimate outsiders. Previous targets had included Marcus Thompson, a brilliant mathematics student whose parents had immigrated from Ethiopia; Sarah Williams, a scholarship student from a working-class family who had committed the sin of earning better grades than Tyler in advanced placement history; and David Kim, whose family's recent arrival from South Korea had made him an obvious choice for harassment that combined xenophobia with simple cruelty. Each of these campaigns had followed similar patterns, beginning with verbal harassment that escalated to social isolation and culminating in physical intimidation that forced their targets to either submit completely to Tyler's dominance or transfer to other schools to escape the pressure. The success of their previous efforts had reinforced Tyler's belief that he could identify and neutralize any potential challenge to his authority before it had time to develop into genuine opposition. Maya Chen had attracted Tyler's attention, not because she posed any obvious threat to his social position, but because her determined efforts to remain invisible struck him as a form of disrespect that needed correction. Her refusal to acknowledge his presence when he spoke to her in hallways, her tendency to look away when he made eye contact, and her general air of being above the social dynamics that he controlled all suggested an attitude that could become problematic if left unchecked. From Tyler's perspective, Maya's behavior represented exactly the kind of subtle insubordination that could encourage other students to question his authority if it went unpunished. Her obvious intelligence and academic success made her potentially dangerous as a role model for other students who might begin to believe that scholastic achievement was more important than social hierarchy. Most troubling of all, her complete indifference to his attempts at intimidation suggested either remarkable courage or dangerous naivety, both of which needed to be addressed before they could inspire copycat behavior from other potential dissidents. The decision to target Maya had been unanimous among Tyler's crew, though their individual motivations differed slightly. Tyler was motivated primarily by his need to maintain absolute social control and his interpretation of Maya's behavior as a personal challenge to his authority. Jake viewed her as a potential threat to the stable order that protected their privileged position within the school's social ecosystem. Connor simply enjoyed the prospect of another entertaining campaign against someone who seemed unlikely to provide effective resistance. None of them had bothered to research Maya's background or investigate the reasons for her transfer to Westfield. They had made assumptions based on her small stature, quiet demeanor, and obvious status as an outsider, concluding that she would follow the same pattern as their previous victims once sufficient pressure was applied. The possibility that their new target might possess resources or capabilities that weren't immediately apparent had never occurred to them, primarily because their previous successes had reinforced their belief that appearances were reliable indicators of a person's capacity for resistance. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.